Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Doyle Heffley of the 122nd District in Carbon County. If I told you that Pennsylvania is experiencing a heroin epidemic, you probably wouldn't think of rural communities and prescription medications. But the truth is, our small towns are suffering as much as the big cities, and the painkillers prescribed by doctors are often the starting point to those who become addicted. My guest for today has devoted her life to advocating for addiction treatment, and she's joined us today to discuss the realities about Pennsylvania's heroin problem. Deb Beck is the president of the Drug and Alcohol Service Providers Organizations of Pennsylvania. Deb, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's unfortunate that we have to be here today talking about this topic. But I wanted to explore some of the opportunities that we see in some of the legislation and some of the opportunities for families that are dealing with addiction and where they can find the help that they need. Deb, if you could just talk to us a little bit about how did we get here? And from 1999 till present, we've seen about a 400% increase in overdose deaths. How did we get here? What is the root cause driving this?
Well, I've been around so long. I've been in the field since '71, and we always had a heroin problem in the state, and it wasn't great to have one, but the numbers were fairly stable. But in the last few years, as you mentioned, the heroin problem has just skyrocketed. Epidemic is the right word. We've lost 2,525 Pennsylvanians to this with 2013 numbers, and the numbers expected to go up. And that's just overdoses. That isn't car wrecks and other things related. What seems to be driving it is the prescription drug, the opiate prescribing practices going on. I personally think, it's my bias, I think there's a marketing campaign to push the sale of prescription opiates. Doctors don't always have time to master all the details of all of the drugs that are available and probably don't realize how addictive they are or don't understand addiction. Doctors generally are not trained in addiction. So what we've seen is a massive increase in the prescribing of opiates, and then when the person gets in trouble and can no longer get the prescription opiate, they switch to heroin, which is much cheaper and widely available. There's another problem. The purity of the heroin is out the ceiling. I mean, 15% purity would have been a lot in the 70s. Now you're seeing 70, 80, 90% purity of heroin.
With the advent of the prescription drugs, and these prescription drugs that we're talking about were primarily designed and created to treat cancer patients, terminally ill cancer patients. And there are folks that are out there that need this medication. Obviously, anybody that's experienced seeing somebody go through those types of treatments or cancer pain knows the need for that. However, with these drugs now being prescribed more frequently to folks, whether it be through car accidents, young folks getting their wisdom teeth out. I've heard stories of folks their children were exposed to it after they had their wisdom teeth out and became addicted. And one of the things that I've heard, and maybe you could expand on this, is it's not necessarily the dosage of the opioid, but it's the length of time that person is exposed to the opioid that would lead them into the more likelihood of becoming addicted.
Well, the other thing too is if you have addiction in the family tree, there is a biogenetic predisposition. So very little use of it you could be off to see the wizard with a full-blown addiction. But you're correct. People are getting OxyContin products for knee surgery and start to use it and then get hooked. Absolutely happening, all kinds of orthopedic procedures, dental procedures, and whatever. In fact, prescribing guidelines are being revised by the departments here in Pennsylvania to guide doctors. Now, you combine that with the fact doctors are never trained, in my opinion, and I have a bias there, adequately in addiction. When they're in medical school, we have some problems here. I would like to see continuing medical school education for any doctor who is going to prescribe an opiate. Because the medical education needs to be specific to addiction, because if you don't understand addiction, you almost can't believe what happens when someone gets hooked. And 1 in 4 of our families has somebody in the family with an addiction now, and it's getting worse, courtesy of these prescription opiates.
Obviously, this program is going to air in the September timeframe, which is National Recovery Month. But one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about this, obviously, there's a push for further legislation to combat this, and I think it has to be confronted at every angle, whether it be law enforcement or criminal justice system, in the hospitals, but also in the families, in the homes. And I think one of the keys is to really bring awareness. So many kids right now are starting their freshman year at school, or maybe they're starting to play athletics, so they're risk for a sports injury. And what what parents need to know, what do they need to be armed with if their child does
Yeah.
encounter a sports injury and they're going in for, to have maybe surgery or for therapy, and what are some of the things that they need to look out for? Is there a specific preset of, you have Oxycontin, you have the Percocets, the Darvocets, and those different drugs that are all derivatives of opioids? Is there something, what would you say to parents if they're confronted with that issue? What should they be consciously aware of?
Well, I just think it's interesting that we're using Oxycontin for knee injuries, and we didn't used to do that. We seem to do fine without using the products with opiates, and I think the parents should challenge the use of an opiate with a young person. Now, I don't want to get you upset here, but I just picked up a newspaper the other day where it said that the FDA just approved the use of Oxycontin for people who are age 11. I think that's crazy. Or, if your body hasn't fully matured and all the hormones and all of the total body function isn't fully up and running, young people addict much more rapidly to substances of addiction. I think that's crazy, unless, of course, God forbid, it's cancer, and you're going to be dying of cancer. You don't want to deprive anyone of that. But I think the real worry to me about families is people don't realize these drugs are dangerous. If you wanted to use heroin, you're going to have to go do something probably illegal to get it, or go somewhere where there are illegal activities. Today, you can find it in the medicine cabinet, and I say that because the kids already know that. And if there's any leftovers from a dental surgery or from anything, parents really need to go upstairs and shake down the medicine cabinet and get rid of that stuff, because their teenagers are going to find it.
Yeah, one of the reports I've seen is 82% of heroin addicts have first started with prescription drugs. And out of that 82%, 70% of the people that are abusing prescription drugs are getting them from families, friends, or out of the medicine cabinet. And now we're living in a time where more and more of our senior population are coming, maybe they're coming to live with their children because they can't live on their own any longer for health reasons. So they're having these medications in the house, so they're more readily available. And I think throughout Carbon County, one of the things that have been implemented through the police departments and through a grant through the district attorney's office is prescription take-back boxes. Almost all of our police stations here in Carbon County, if somebody has an unused or unwanted prescription, the best thing you can do for your family and for your community is to take that and get rid of it at one of those safety prescription take-back boxes. And it's so important to not have that around the house.
Well, if I may, the Attorney General's office, one of the staff, and also the Department of Drug and Alcohol, Gary Tennis's office, told us that 16,000 pounds had been taken back. And I've been spending time trying to picture what 16,000 pounds of a tiny pill even looks like. That's 2 tons.
Yes.
That means there were that many pills that were prescribed that were unneeded. I mean, on the face of it, that tells you there's overprescription problem. There's a disposal problem, but on the face of it, it's an overprescription problem. Why are we prescribing to the level that there'd be 16 tons of this stuff in the take-back boxes? It seems to me we've got to address the right problem. I've seen some folks who are worried about dealers. I worry about dealers too. But wait a minute, why are we overprescribing like this? And the data that you just put on the table is very important. It isn't some dealer on the street corner. It's your own medicine chest where most of this is coming from. And it seems to me that we got to identify the problem right in order to come up with a solution. If it's true that we're getting these drugs through prescribing practices, then it's time to shut the faucet off.
Yes. And
then there wouldn't be dealers to deal with it.
And now we have authored legislation that was enacted. I know you were actively pushing for that. It was the Controlled Substance Database.
Yes.
And I think that's, but that is being implemented right now. That's going to be up to speed. And what it will do is it'll give doctors and pharmacists the tools that they need at the point of prescribing. Doctors sometimes, and you hear from doctors all the time, they're pushed, and a lot of times also part of the problem is the hospitals are being rated on how they treat pain. Since we started treating pain as a 5th vital sign, so hospitals are, the federal ratings for hospitals are contingent upon how they treat pain. So if a patient comes in or if a doctor is treating somebody, they come in and they say, I have a lot of pain, I need medication, obviously they want to keep those ratings up. Now hospitals have done a lot. They've really taken the first step, cutting back on this. But what the database does is it gives the doctors there that at the point of prescribing, they can go into that database and they can see if that patient has been prescribed any of these opioid pills or any kind of addictive medication, and if they're doctor shopping or if they're maybe using it for a diversion to resell it. And I think it's really going to give the doctors and the pharmacists at the point of prescribing the tools that they need, and it's something that they don't have now. So I think that that database is so critical. I was happy to see that passed.
Yeah.
hoping that by the time this airs, the budget will be passed, and that will be moving in the right direction to get that up and running.
Who could have imagined? I couldn't have imagined in '71 when I got in the field that the heroin problem would be being driven by the prescription drug market. And we got to unplug that, because we're never going to solve this problem as long as there are careless prescribing practices or uneducated ones. I think that can be addressed. But I think the marketing, the misleading marketing of this stuff has got to stop also. As doctors don't have time to go back and learn about all these dozens of new drugs that are on the market. We've got to make sure that the misleading marketing practices stop as well.
And also, I think educating parents and grandparents to, I was talking to a family member who had seen their son battling addiction for 6-7 years, and it all started with a knee injury and being prescribed an opioid pain relief. And you look back and say, had they prescribed something different, had it been treated in a different way, he wouldn't have lost the last 7 years of his life fighting addiction. So, I think that's something that parents really need to be aware of, is how addictive these drugs are. I mean, we look at heroin and say, why would anybody get mixed up in heroin? But yet what's in our medicine cabinets is the exact same thing that the drug dealers are selling on the street, and it's highly addictive, and it's easy, much easier to take a pill than it is to put a needle in.
It's a better grade also, what's in the medicine cabinet. Again, if you couple that with the fact that the physicians are not educated on addiction in general, physicians will tell you it may be 4 hours of education in their entire medical school education is on addiction, and yet it's the number 1, 2, or 3 leading disease killer in America, depending on whose research you look at. I hope that's something that this crisis, if it would remedy the education and addiction in the medical schools for docs and nurses, it would be great. They don't mean any harm here. It's just, if you don't know addiction, you don't know what you're getting hit with. I think your example is a great one. I mean, a kid going in for knee surgery after a football injury and ends up buying heroin on the street. Scary stuff, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and it's scary for parents. Obviously, as a parent myself, that's why I really want to bring this attention. Now, one of the things that we've been working on legislation and passing in Harrisburg, obviously the database is huge. Also, Narcan, which is something that we've been talking about, and we've had several articles in the local paper. Yeah. What is Narcan, and how does it work?
And actually, I hate to say miracle drug, because everyone always says the drug's a miracle. This is an inert substance, meaning it does absolutely nothing unless you have taken opiates, and then it just forces your body to discharge all the opiates in a mass withdrawal instantaneously. And the Center for Rural PA and the General Assembly, I think, has spent a lot of time educating itself on this, and us with it. And then our two big pushes legislatively were the prescription drug monitoring, because we needed to cut down on the supply. But in the meantime, people need to be alive. What this is it can be administered as a needle, through a needle, or through a nasal spray on someone who is overdosed and is nearly dead or appears to be dead. It brings them back around if there's even an ounce of life in them. Just stunning medical development. It's been around actually for a long time in emergency rooms. I guess it hasn't been widely available to first responders in a nasal form before. And you all passed legislations to provide that, also to provide it. I thought the most important part of the law, I thought, was the part that provided it for families.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. So, like you had mentioned earlier, 1 in 4 families is dealing with some kind of addiction. Not everybody's dealing with an opioid addiction. However, if there is a family out there and they're struggling with a loved one that has an opioid addiction, I think the key is to look at getting access to this medication, and you can do that by going online. There is a quick education program to do online, and you can do that right by contacting Carbon County if they wanted to contact Carbon Monroe Pike Drug and Alcohol, and the number there would be, it's a toll-free number. It's 866-824-3578, or they can call the local number at 610-377-5177. I believe those numbers will flash across the screen. But basically, the family could contact them and get set up to take that program, so they can get that script and keep it at home in their medicine cabinet. Now, from what I understand, this drug came about from years ago when people would have surgery, and they wanted to bring them out of surgery. How they would wake them up real fast, and anybody that's gone through any kind of procedures at a hospital has had experience this. But I think it's so crucial to get that out there. 28% of the police departments now across the state are carrying it, and we're looking at getting more and more police activity in carrying that. 55% of police departments that have responded to overdoses, 55% of those responses wind up in a fatality. 45% are non-fatal, and 84% of the police departments that have responded to an overdose in the last 12 months. So, they are on the front line. They shouldn't be the EMTs, but this is just one more tool in the tool chest. So really want to get that information out as to how that drug works and how it can save lives. It won't cure the addiction, but it will save that life and hopefully get those
we need to find a way to make sure police have this and have this funded ongoingly, because it has a long half-life. They can keep it for a long time, but they're still going to need a resupply periodically. Our papers have been rife with stories of people whose lives have been saved through the use of Narcan. It is just a blessing.
Yeah, it really is. Well, we're going to take a quick break right now on Legislative Report, and we'll return in a moment.
Did you know that Act 16 of 1999 honors one of the greatest leaders in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives? The Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building, once known as the Capitol Annex, is located next to the main Capitol building and honors the late Speaker of the House, Matthew J. Ryan. Those who visit this building will observe the magnificent architectural designs providing eloquence and grandeur to the building. Known as one of the greatest members in the history of the Pennsylvania State House, Matthew Ryan started his career in the legislature in 1963 and was elected Speaker in 1981. His charisma and knowledge will forever be reflected in the building now named after this great legislative leader. Now you know.
Did you know that Violet Oakley was the first female artist to receive a large commission for artwork done in a United States Capitol building? In 1902, Joseph Houston, designer and architect for the 3rd Harrisburg Capitol building, commissioned Violet Oakley to paint murals for the governor's reception room. He believed that Oakley's contribution would add interest to the building and act as an encouragement of women of the state. Prior to beginning her work for the Capitol, Oakley set out to England to conduct research for her murals. Upon return, she decided to center her artwork on William Penn and the founding of Pennsylvania. Oakley made sure that Penn's ideals of justice and peace could be seen throughout her work. In 1906, she completed 13 murals titled The Founding of the State of Liberty Spiritual, and was placed in sequential order around the governor's reception room. These murals were some of the first to be installed in the Capitol. When Edwin Austin Abbey, another artist for the Capitol, died in 1911, Oakley was offered another opportunity to create murals for the unfinished Senate and Supreme Court chambers. Her work on the Senate murals, including International Understanding, was completed by 1919. Oakley then completed the Supreme Court murals, including the Divine Law, by 1927. Oakley is said to be the principal artist for the Capitol, with a total of 43 murals on display. She remains one of the greatest muralists in the United States. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. Today we're discussing how heroin is affecting our rural communities. My guest is Deb Beck from the Drug and Alcohol Service Providers Organization. Deb, welcome back.
Thank you.
Well, in the first half of the segment, we talked a lot about identifying the problem, how we got to where we're at, what parents can be on the lookout for, and some of the prevention measures. Now, if somebody is dealing with that, I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and treatment and recovery. Treatment does work and recovery doesn't work. And you have a saying that addiction, how is it? Addiction is always fatal unless you get into treatment.
It's a progressive, always fatal illness unless you deal with it, whether that's an opiate addiction or an alcohol addiction. It is a fatal illness unless you get help. If you get help or an intervention of some sort. So if there's anybody in the listening area that has somebody in your family who you are worried about, first of all, if it's opiates and heroin, for heaven's sakes, listen to what the state rep said and get Narcan. You want to have it in your medicine cabinet. Because truly the first responders are often mom and dad coming downstairs in the living room and finding a loved one. They should have that even as you would have something for a bee sting or a bad allergy. You want like an EpiPen. You want to have that in your medicine chest if you know you have a problem. The second thing is if you've got a loved one with a problem, people who get treatment do recover, but you're going to have to fight for what you need. We have a myriad of insurance coverages for drug and alcohol addiction. The coverage is there, but it's really hard to access it, and your constituents need to know that they should insist on it. And treatment usually means detoxification for a period of time to get the brains unscrambled from assorted substances. And for opiates, I really recommend long-term residential rehab, which is very hard to get, but insurance does cover it, and so does Medicaid, but you're going to have to insist. And I hope your constituents will just beat the doors down and say, I know I have this coverage. Also, like diabetes, people don't always follow directions the first time. We're being human. None of us follow directions the first time. I know with my doctor, I follow 1 out of 3 directions generally, and then I get sicker and I go back and think, oh, okay. That's pretty normal. And then with an addiction, it's worse because both men and women are embarrassed that they have the problem, think they can handle it themselves in a way that doesn't pertain to other kinds of illnesses, so they battle with it longer. The important thing is to never give up and keep throwing them back in until they get it. Today I'm blessed with hundreds and hundreds of recovering friends who were totally drug-free from all kinds of drugs and alcohol in the past. The recovery will occur if the person gets into the right level of care for a long enough period of time. If it requires a criminal justice lever to do it, use it. Do whatever you have to do to save the life of your loved one. You just got to do that.
Mm-hmm. I know one of the things that we had talked about one time, and maybe it's a little bit off what we're talking about here in the treatment, is if family members. If there's an older sibling in the family who's experienced addiction, the likelihood of those younger siblings following suit. What would you say to parents who maybe have dealt with that or maybe are dealing with it with an older sibling, and what can they do to help those younger children?
You're very wise. I mean, I learned very early if there was one, then I started thinking about, my own siblings. We always knew what each other was doing. That just makes sense. That doesn't mean that all of your kids are using, but you better make awful sure. You better check with the other children. Also, this is something, families don't get a manual on what to do with an addicted kid when a child is born. You need to go for outside help. You really need outside help on this. You want to catch it early, you want to deal with it firmly, and you want to deal with it repeatedly until the person gets clean. You've got to do that. You won't have to do that your whole life. People generally, if they get into 5 years without a relapse, typically never go back. You'll see some exceptions, but typically never go back. It's interesting. It's kind of like cancer. You get to year 5, people generally don't go back. But until you get to that 5th year, you need to use every resource available to you. And I don't know, maybe you want to talk about Carbon-Monroe Pike Single County Authority again as an opening place.
Yeah, Carbon-Monroe Pike is the single county authority, and they are the provider for these services in Carbon County. Obviously, if anybody's having any issues, you need looking for treatment, looking for facilities. If you need assistance with the insurance companies, they can always contact my office.
Right.
I have 2 offices full-time in the county, and those numbers will come across the screen a little bit later in the program as well. But to reach out and get some help. You're not alone. Obviously the numbers have shown it. We've had 17 overdose deaths as reported by the coroner in Carbon County. Pennsylvania is right, at the top. I think we're 9th in the nation for overdose deaths. More people die of overdoses in Pennsylvania than car accidents. And Pennsylvania, in Carbon County, we're 5th per capita. So we have, this problem is here. It doesn't mean our county is any worse or any better than any else. But having the education and knowing how to combat this drug epidemic, and it definitely is different than in the past. It's not the drug dealer necessarily on the corner that's selling the drugs, but it's what's in your medicine cabinet, it's what's being prescribed. That's critical that folks know that and have the tools. Now, September is Recovery Month. and it's always a pleasure when we see people come into the office that have gone through recovery. And I know there will be a lot of events throughout Carbon County. What would you say to somebody? What can people give back, or how can families get to that point?
Yeah, well, I hope the people in your area will get involved in the recovery events up there, because if you don't think you don't have to have a loved one in recovery. You could have one who isn't yet, and to go participate in some of those events and take a look at what happens. I will tell you my experience. People in recovery are usually extraordinary people, and they are for this reason. First of all, no one sets out to be a heroin addict, and it's just terrible. It's a horrible struggle. They're battling with what could be a mortal illness. People who recover from illnesses of that sort end up being usually pretty extraordinary in terms of giving back to communities in ways you could never imagine, because many of them do it anonymously. This is really, really worth every bit of the effort. When I ran a program, my observation was most of the people in the program were a lot smarter than I was, because to be able to manage an addiction and a real life at the same time required extraordinary energy. So if we get rid of the one job, and now the job is being a whole human being, these people just set the world on fire. They're special people, and I hope not just people in recovery go to the recovery celebrations in your community. I'll certainly be at the ones in my community.
Yeah. And also looking forward, I mean, as we're moving forward, I think there is a push here at the national level and certainly at the state level to continue to combat this issue. Yes. We've got the Narcan. We've passed legislation to make that readily available. We got the database in place, and we're looking at about 15 recommendations for everything from tamper-resistant opioids, which I'll be introducing legislation on that in the near future, and also looking at educating. How do we better educate our doctors on addiction treatment, and how do we better get that collaboration between the departments, and talking with children and youth. I mean, so many children right now, young kids, are being raised by grandparents because their children are dealing with addiction. And while it is a small segment of society, we have introduced a whole new segment of society to the addictive powers of opioids through these prescription medications.
Well, if we had an epidemic of West Nile virus that killed 2,525 people in Pennsylvania in 1 year, the whole state would be mobilized. It's time we mobilize like that. Yeah. We had a wish list last year, and the first two were the prescription drug monitoring bill, which you helped push through. The Narcan bill was our second. Yeah. The third was to see larger Medicaid coverage for people with addictions. That is now underway as well. There are some missing pieces. We need to turn the faucet off, and that's overprescribing. It doesn't help to have the FDA come out and say we're not going to use OxyContin with 11-year-olds. I know a number of legislators wrote to Washington when the Zohydro was being moved forward by the FDA, and I know there were some changes made at the FDA because you wrote in. So I thank you for all of that. What has to happen is the legislature continuing to put its flashlight and Klieg light on this problem until it goes away, and you have led that effort. I thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Deb. And as we're wrapping up here on our time, just to kind of recap, is obviously things to do are getting educated. Families, if you have children, getting educated, finding out what drugs are out there. I mean, this is a whole new realm with the prescription drugs, and we've seen an explosion, unfortunately, in overdose deaths, and a 400% increase since 1999, when these drugs really came on the market and are being marketed as they are. Also, I think parents talking to children, but also being aware if you have those drugs in the house to get rid of them. They're not going to be any good, and really talking to your doctors about alternative treatments, whether it be therapy or different types of aspirin or ibuprofens. We're cutting back on the so much of our pain is caused by inflammation. That's and the opioid doesn't treat inflammation. And I'm not a doctor, but this is what what we're being told. But I think it's so important to try to get the information out there.
But there is one final thing, and that is we have to put the treatment system back together. Yeah. It's pretty well fallen apart for a variety of reasons. It's time we now get the treatment system ready to catch those who have gone on to get addicted.
Well, thank you, Deb, and that's all the time we have for today's program. I'm State Representative Doyle Heffley. If you need assistance with any state matters, please feel free to contact me at my local office or through my website. The address and number will be shown in a moment. Thank you for watching, and please join me next time for Legislative Report.